Most people do not have a money problem. They have a control problem. They have built a life where every dollar is already promised, every month is already spoken for, every investment is already committed, and every decision is already made under pressure. Then they call that efficiency, they call it discipline, they call it being fully invested. I call it financial nakedness. If one bad quarter, one bad boss, one bad diagnosis, one bad market, or one bad deal can force your hand, you are not rich. You are simply decorated. You are wearing numbers. You are wearing statements. You are wearing projected returns, but you are not wearing power. I have spent my life around capital, and one thing becomes obvious very early if you know what you are looking at. The world worships return and misunderstands position. It worships motion and misunderstands readiness. It worships the spreadsheet and ignores the war chest. That is how ordinary people get trapped. They are taught that every idle dollar is lazy. Every uninvested dollar is a mistake. Every large cash balance is an embarrassment. Every month they are told the same thing in more polished language. Put it to work, maximize, optimize. Don't let it sit there. Don't miss the market. Don't lose to inflation. Don't be conservative. Don't be afraid. And because they hear that message often enough, they start feeling ashamed of liquidity. That shame is expensive because the moment you are taught to hate cash, you are taught to love dependence. You become dependent on your next paycheck, dependent on stable markets, dependent on being able to sell when you want, dependent on other people staying calm, dependent on the bank approving you, dependent on the buyer still being there, dependent on your employer, not changing the rules, dependent on life not interrupting your plan. That is not a strong financial life. That is a beautifully organized weak position. I am not talking about stuffing cash under a mattress and refusing to own productive assets. I have built my entire life on ownership. I prefer businesses to wages, equity to consumption, and productive assets to idle vanity. But that is exactly why I respect cash more than most people do. Cash is not there to impress you with an annual percentage. Cash is there to keep you from becoming prey. Cash is there so that when the room changes temperature, you do not have to change your principles. Cash is there so that when everybody else is cornered, you are the one person in the room who still has range of motion. That is what a war chest is. A war chest is not dead money. A war chest is stored decision power. A war chest is delayed force. A war chest is freedom before freedom is fashionable. A war chest is what lets you refuse bad terms, survive bad weather, and strike when prices break. Most people never build one because they have been trained to think only in one dimension. They know how to ask, what return am I giving up? They almost never ask, what pressure am I removing? They know how to calculate inflation. They almost never calculate desperation. They know how to estimate the future value of an index fund. They almost never estimate the lifetime cost of being forced to sell at the wrong time, stay in the wrong job, accept the wrong client, tolerate the wrong relationship, or pass on the one great opportunity that shows up when everybody else is gasping. That is why so many people with respectable net worth still live like hostages. They are paper strong and position weak. They are portfolio rich and decision poor. They are net worth positive and option negative. That is not wealth. That is a costume. Let me make this more brutal. If all of your money is working, then you are working for all of your money. Because if you need access, you must ask permission from the market. You must hope the timing is favorable. You must hope the price is decent. You must hope the buyer appears. You must hope volatility is low enough. You must hope the emergency does not arrive during the drawdown. You must hope the opportunity does not arrive while you are locked. That is too much hoping for a person who claims to be secure. When I look at a financial life, I do not begin by asking what the expected return is. I begin by asking what can force a sale, what can force a compromise, what can force a bad bargain, what can force obedience, because the most expensive financial errors in life usually do not come from low returns. They come from forced behavior. A man does not destroy 10 years of compounding because he earned 8% instead of 10%. He destroys 10 years of compounding because he loses his job during a downturn, has no cash, sells quality assets at a discount, cancels the contributions, panics, waits for clarity, re-enters late, and then pretends the problem was bad luck. It was not bad luck. It was exposure without a war chest. That is a different problem. You need to understand the psychological violence of living without liquidity. People speak about not having cash as if it is a technical portfolio choice. It is not. It is a nervous system problem when you have no liquid reserves. Every inconvenience feels bigger than it is. Every market drop feels personal. Every delay becomes a threat. Every surprise becomes an emergency. Every negotiation begins from weakness because the clock is always against you. That kind of life corrupts judgment. You stop choosing, you start reacting, you stop allocating, you start defending, you stop thinking like an owner, you start behaving like a cornered employee. That is the hidden tax of being fully stretched. It is not just that you have less money, it is that you think worse. Desperation does not merely hurt your balance sheet. Desperation lowers the quality of every decision that touches your future. And once that happens, the damage compounds in ways the spreadsheet never shows. You take the job you should have refused, you keep the client you should have fired, you sign the lease you cannot comfortably carry. You keep the car payment because your identity got tied to the vehicle. You hang on to a fragile lifestyle because you are too embarrassed to shrink it. You pretend a shaky situation is fine because you cannot afford honesty. That is what a weak cash position does. It turns truth into a luxury. A war chest reverses, that the first thing cash gives you is calm during chaos. Everybody likes to repeat that famous line about being greedy when others are fearful. Very few people are ever in position to do it. They quote courage while owning no spare liquidity. They celebrate contrarianism with all their capital already committed. They talk about buying blood in the streets with a debit card that is already sweating. When the market drops 30 or 40%, most people do not go shopping. They go silent, they stare at screens, they refresh the news, they check their retirement balance every hour. They promise themselves they are long-term investors while feeling physically sick. Then life lands on top of the drawdown, a layoff, a medical bill, a business slowdown, a home repair, a family crisis. Now, the theory of long-term investing collides with the reality of short-term cash needs. That is when bad arithmetic becomes catastrophic behavior. If you have no cash, you do not buy the bargain. You become the bargain. You become the person selling good assets because timing betrayed you. You become the landlord unloading a good property because debt service does not care about patience. You become the business owner taking ugly terms because payroll is Friday. You become the investor liquidating quality holdings to cover a temporary hole. That is how wealth transfers, not from the ignorant to the informed, from the illiquid to the liquid. The room always rewards the party who can wait. That is why I have never been embarrassed by cash. A war chest makes panic productive. When prices break and good assets are suddenly offered by bad circumstances, the person with liquidity is no longer a spectator. He becomes a collector. He can buy the stock the crowd was celebrating 6 months earlier and now cannot bear to look at. He can buy the property from the owner who did not have enough runway. He can buy the small business from the founder who built something sound but got trapped by timing. He can make the deal that changes a decade because he had the discipline to look underinvested while everybody else was busy looking smart. This is one of the great secrets of capital. You often have to look foolish before you get to act brilliantly. A war chest almost always looks inefficient right before it becomes decisive. People mock cash in bull markets because bull markets reward motion. Everything going up makes reserve capital look timid. Every year of smooth gains makes liquidity look lazy. Financial commentary starts sounding like a religion. You are told that time in the market is everything, that cash is trash, that caution is fear, that hesitation is ignorance, that every dollar not deployed is a confession of incompetence, that language is useful for one reason. It keeps people fully committed right before their flexibility would have mattered most. You need to hear this clearly. The market does not punish caution every year, but life punishes overextension on schedule. There is always another downturn. There is always another forced seller. There is always another moment when somebody with a beautiful balance sheet but no cash discovers that theoretical wealth cannot pay tomorrow morning. Problem, your job is not to win the applause contest in the smooth years. Your job is to own enough dry strength that you can write checks when the crowd is shaking. That is offensive cash. Most people call cash defensive because they have never understood offense. They think offense means maximum exposure. It does not. True offense means being able to act when action pays the most. A football team is not more offensive because all 11 players sprint in random directions at the snap. A general is not more aggressive because he sends every soldier into the first hill and leaves nothing in reserve. That is not offense. That is emotional expenditure. Offense is reserved power correctly timed. Offense is waiting with force. Offense is knowing that your greatest edge may arrive in a week when other people are trying to survive. Not in a month when everything feels obvious. A war chest is how you preserve that edge. The second thing cash gives you is away power. This might be even more valuable than the bargains. A person with 2 years of accessible expenses in cash does not hear the world the same way. A terrible boss speaks to him differently, even if the boss does not know why. An abusive client gets negotiated with differently. A failing partnership gets examined more honestly. A bad deal gets declined faster. A manipulative relationship loses some of its grip. Why? Because dependence weakens language. When you need the next check, you cannot speak cleanly. When you need the deal, you cannot price correctly. When you need the approval, you cannot negotiate from dignity. When you need the market to cooperate, you cannot think long term. This is why so many high-income people are secretly less free than lower-income people with stronger liquidity habits. They have bigger houses, nicer watches, louder vacations, and thinner options. They have gold handcuffs and call that success. They are living proof that income does not equal control. Control comes from the gap between what you need and what you have already secured. That gap is widened by cash. You may earn half as much as your neighbor and still have twice the practical power, if your life is not built on fragile monthly obligations. The man making $300,000 a year while needing $26,000 every month to hold his image together is often weaker than the woman making $140,000 while sitting on 2 years of cash and modest living costs. One has income, the other has refusal power. I would rather own refusal power. Refusal power changes the quality of every future opportunity because people can smell desperation, employers smell it, lenders smell it, clients smell it, buyers smell it, even friends and family can feel it. The moment they know you need the outcome more than they do, your leverage falls. But when you have a war chest, you move differently. You ask cleaner questions, you wait longer, you decline worse offers, you stop performing eagerness. That selectivity alone improves your life more than a small difference in annual returns ever will. This is one of the most misunderstood contrasts in finance. People compare cash to investments only on a return chart. They almost never compare a desperate investor to a patient investor. They almost never compare a trap worker to a mobile worker. They almost never compare a frightened negotiator to a calm negotiator. They almost never compare a lifestyle addict to an independent operator. Yet those are the comparisons that determine whether you are living under your money or above it. The third thing cash gives you is protection from the ugliest form of opportunity cost. Everybody knows the visible opportunity cost of cash. You hold $100,000 at a low yield. Inflation runs 3%, you lose purchasing power. The math is easy, so the argument feels conclusive. But the invisible opportunity cost is usually larger. What is the opportunity cost of being unable to buy a quality asset at half price because all of your capital is tied up? What is the opportunity cost of selling into a crash because your emergency fund was fiction? What is the opportunity cost of staying in the wrong career 5 extra years because your savings are too thin to absorb a transition? What is the opportunity cost of missing the chance to buy a business, fund a new venture, relocate, help a family member, or back your own competence? Because the portfolio was fully optimized, what is the opportunity cost of permanent stress? People calculate the first cost precisely and ignore the others, because the others do not fit neatly into the advisor's software, but life is not lived inside advisor software. Life is lived in timing, pressure, courage, and optionality. I have seen men lose far more wealth from the absence of cash than from the erosion of cash. A 30% market decline does not merely reduce a portfolio. It reveals who was pretending to be long-term. A good business offered at a distressed price does not merely create an upside opportunity. It reveals who had the reserve strength to capitalize. A job loss does not merely reduce income. It reveals whether the household had built a war chest or merely a fragile display case. This is why opportunity cost works in both directions. Cash may cost you some return in calm years. Illiquidity may cost you the best decision of your life in violent years. Do not let tidy mathematics blind you to untidy reality. Now let us talk about the arithmetic more plainly. Suppose you keep $100,000 in cash and inflation quietly takes 3% a year. That is $3,000 of visible drag. The world screams about that number because it is easy to quote. Now suppose you are fully invested instead. The market falls 30%. You need $30,000 for an emergency. You sell into the decline. Now you have not merely lost $9,000 on paper from that slice. You have also given up the recovery on what you sold. If the market recovers strongly over the next several years, that forced sale can easily cost you tens of thousands more than the annual inflation drag you were trying so hard to avoid. And that is before you count the lost ability to buy at depressed prices with fresh cash. The arithmetic of cash is not one-dimensional. It is not cash versus return. It is flexibility versus forced behavior. It is calm versus compulsion. It is strike capacity versus spectator status. It is time on your side versus time working against you. The fourth thing cash gives you is patience with everything else you own. This matters more than most people realize. The quality of an investment is one thing. The quality of your holding behavior is another. A wonderful investment can still become a poor result if your life structure forces you to touch it at the wrong time. People imagine that patience is purely a character trait. Sometimes it is, more often, it is a liquidity trait. When you know you have enough cash to absorb life, you can let your investments behave like investments. You do not need every asset to double as an emergency fund, a career insurance policy, and a daily emotional support animal. You can let the stock recover. You can let the thesis mature. You can let the real estate cycle turn. You can let the business renovation pay off. You can let temporary ugliness remain temporary. Without a war chest, every fluctuation becomes an emergency meeting inside your head. You start checking, worrying, second-guessing, stress-eating, doom-scrolling, rationalizing, and finally acting at the exact moment. Action is most destructive. With a war chest, you can be boring. Do not underestimate that sentence. Boring is a superpower in investing. Boring is what allows compounding to finish its work. Boring is what keeps you from interrupting the machine. Boring is what lets your intelligence matter more than your nerves. I have met many people who thought they needed a better strategy. What they actually needed was enough cash to stop sabotaging the strategy they already had. That is a different diagnosis. You do not fix a nervous system problem with more financial jargon. You fix it with reserves. Now I want to say something unfashionable. Many people who are aggressively investing for the long term are actually running a hidden leverage structure, not formal leverage. Life leverage. Their mortgage is high. Their car payments are fixed. Their private consumption is sticky. Their children's commitments are expensive. Their identity depends on maintaining appearances. Their investments are fully deployed. Their emergency fund is cosmetic. Their job is tiring but necessary. Their boss is intolerable but unavoidable. Their portfolio is long-term in language and short. Term in reality because any real disruption would force liquidation. That person is not an investor. That person is a leveraged lifestyle operator wearing an investor costume. A war chest strips away the costume and puts truth back on the table. If you want genuine long-term behavior, you need short-term strength. If you want to be patient, you need liquidity. If you want to buy in chaos, you need reserves before chaos. If you want independence, you need years of breathing room, not motivational slogans. This is where the worker versus owner contrast becomes sharp. A worker with no cash must sell time on demand. An owner with a war chest can choose when to act. A worker with no cash negotiates from survival. An owner with a war chest negotiates from standards. A worker with no cash sees downturns as threats. An owner with a war chest sees downturns as inventory. A worker with no cash thinks in weeks. An owner with a war chest gets to think in cycles. That difference compounds. It compounds in confidence, in patience, in negotiation quality, in timing, in career design, in family stability, and yes, eventually in net worth. Do not miss the deeper psychological shift here. A war chest changes your identity. The moment you know you could live for a year or two without new income. Something subtle but powerful happens inside you. The world stops feeling like a series of authorities and starts feeling like a field of choices. Your standards rise, your tolerance for nonsense falls, you quit lying to yourself about what you hate, you become less willing to perform wealth and more interested in preserving power. That is a very profitable transformation. The money is still the money. But the person allocating it is no longer the same person. This is why I dislike the shallow phrase, cash is king. It sounds catchy, but it is incomplete. Cash is not king. Cash is command. Cash is not a trophy. Cash is a lever. Cash is not a return engine by itself. Cash is what allows you to use every other engine correctly. That is a much better definition. The financial industry, of course, has almost no incentive to talk this way. Most of the machinery around you is built to monetize deployment. Advisors get paid on assets under management. Platforms get paid when capital is active. Product manufacturers get paid when money is allocated into products. Media gets attention when it gives you urgency, fear, excitement rankings, price targets, and continuous reasons to do something. Very few people get paid when you keep meaningful reserves and become harder to influence. So the system nudges you toward full commitment. It makes you feel unsophisticated for holding cash. It makes liquidity look embarrassing. It makes prudence look outdated. It makes patience look unambitious. That is because a person with a war chest is harder to sell to, harder to scare, and harder to rush. He does not need every promise. He does not need every product. He does not need to chase every new story. He can wait. Waiting is expensive for people trying to earn fees from your movement. That is why you must build your financial life around your interests. Not theirs. Let me make it concrete the way ordinary households actually live it. Suppose your monthly expenses are $4,000. 1 year of living costs is $48,000. 2 years is $96,000. Add a separate strike reserve of $50,000 because you want the ability to act if markets break, a property appears, or a business needs quick capital. Now your war chest is $146,000. The spreadsheet crowd will gasp. They will tell you that a third of your net worth is doing nothing. But if that reserve keeps you from selling stocks in a crash, gives you the nerve to leave a poisonous job, lets you buy when assets are offered at 40 cents on the dollar, and allows your long-term holdings to recover untouched, then that cash is not doing nothing. It is doing 4 jobs before breakfast. Or imagine 2 people each start with roughly the same overall wealth. One keeps everything invested because he wants maximum efficiency. The other keeps a meaningful war chest. Then the market drops 35%, an emergency takes 30,000, and good assets go on sale. The first man sells weakness to cover the emergency and watches the rebound from the sidelines. The second man uses cash for the emergency, leaves his assets alone, and still has reserve strength to buy fear at a discount. After a few years, the gap between them no longer comes from annual return. It comes from position. Now the question becomes practical. How much cash belongs in the war chest? There is no universal number, because the purpose of the war chest depends on the life it is defending and the opportunities it is meant to seize. But I can tell you this with confidence. The amount is probably higher than conventional wisdom makes people comfortable with. 3 to 6 months of expenses is not a war chest. It is a band-aid. It is a starter shield. It is the difference between a flat tire being annoying and a flat tire becoming debt. Useful, necessary, not enough. A war chest begins where basic emergency thinking ends. A war chest must be large enough to do 3 things. First, absorb true disruption without forcing sales. Second, give you real walk-away power. Third, allow decisive action if serious opportunity arrives. For many people that means 1 full year of expenses in accessible cash. For some it means 2. Then, depending on your ambitions, you may need a separate opportunity reserve. If you hope to buy into markets aggressively during crashes, acquire a small business, make a down payment on a distressed property, bridge a career transition, or back a well-timed operating opportunity, that reserve cannot be symbolic. It must be able to matter. That is the mistake so many people make. They keep just enough cash to avoid embarrassment, not enough to create advantage. They are protected from inconvenience, but not positioned for asymmetry. I want you to think about your war chest in layers. The first layer is survival cash. This keeps randomness from breaking your structure. The second layer is refusal cash. This gives you the ability to say no without lying. The third layer is strike cash. This lets you move when prices fracture and other people freeze. Those 3 layers do not all need to be identical in every household. But if you have none of them in meaningful size, then you are pretending to be financially strong while depending on favorable conditions. That is not strength. That is weather dependency. And weather dependency is a terrible foundation for freedom. A person who insists on being 100% invested at all times is often confusing motion with courage. Real courage is not being all in when conditions are kind. Real courage is preserving enough control that you can remain rational when conditions turn hostile. I have kept large reserves at times not because I forgot how compounding works, but because I understand exactly how compounding works. It works best when you do not interrupt it. It works best when you can buy more in stress. It works best when you are not forced to liquidate. It works best when patience is structurally possible. A war chest makes that structural without structure. People default to emotion, and emotion is an expensive portfolio manager. Let me push this one step further. Cash also protects your dignity. That word belongs in money conversations much more than it does. A person without liquidity will eventually have to accept conditions that offend his own judgment. He will tolerate the insulting client, the manipulative employer, the predatory lender, the bad contract, the stupid deadline, the upside-down refinance, the ugly sale, the panic disposition. He will tell himself he had no choice. Sometimes that is true, but more often he had no war chest. There is a difference. Dignity is not just moral posture. Dignity is financial design. Dignity is what happens when you have built enough reserve strength that you can obey your standards without being destroyed by the waiting period. This is why I say real wealth is not merely the size of the pile, it is the shape of the position. A huge net worth with no liquidity can still behave like weakness. A smaller net worth with a strong war chest can behave like power. That is a hard truth for status-driven people to accept because it means the person living in the quieter house, driving the older car, and holding the larger cash balance may actually be operating from a much stronger strategic position than the person performing abundance at maximum strain. Consumption and freedom are not the same thing. Status and control are not the same thing. High income and independence are not the same thing. Net worth and readiness are not the same thing. Once you understand that, you stop asking the childish question, how much cash is too much? You start asking the adult question, how much control am I willing to surrender in exchange for a higher quoted return? That is a much better question, because quoted return is not the only return. There is return on sleep, return on negotiation, return on selective action, return on patience, return on honesty, return on mobility, return on never having to sell good assets under ugly conditions, return on being able to buy when others cannot, return on no longer making fear-based decisions. Those returns are real. They simply do not show up in the same font as market performance. If you build a life that worships only the visible return, you will usually sacrifice the invisible return that makes the visible one easier to capture. That is a foolish bargain. Now, I am not giving you permission to be lazy. A war chest is not an excuse to avoid investing. It is not an alibi for timidity. It is not a place to hide from ownership. It is not a religion of permanent caution. Your long-term wealth will still come from productive assets, patient ownership, disciplined allocation, and keeping your life below your means. But the war chest is what stops those principles from collapsing the first time life hits you out of order. You need both. You need the machine that compounds, and you need the reserve that keeps the machine from being dismantled in a storm. That balance is wiser than extremism. Extremism sounds smarter in print. Balance survives better in reality. So here is the test. If the market fell 35% next month, would you become a shopper or a hostage? If your income stopped for 6 months, would you become more selective or more obedient? If a genuinely great opportunity appeared this year, could you move with force or only admire it from a distance? If the answer to those questions makes you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is cheaper than denial, because this is the door most people eventually reach. You can keep chasing maximum theoretical return while staying structurally fragile, explaining away your dependence with clever language. Or you can build a war chest, accept the appearance of inefficiency, and buy yourself something far rarer than yield command. And once you have command, you will notice something most people never understand until it is too late. Cash did not make you smaller. Cash made you dangerous in the right way. Cash made you patient enough to be rational. Cash made you liquid enough to be selective. Cash made you calm enough to be offensive. Cash made you independent enough to tell the truth. And in the long run, those qualities do not merely protect wealth. They create it. So the real question is not whether cash drags on your spreadsheet. The real question is whether you are willing to keep living without a war chest while telling yourself you are free, because the next storm will not care how optimized you felt in the sunshine. When that day comes, you will discover whether your money was a machine you owned or a machine that owned you, and that is a choice you do not make during the crash. You make it now.